Welcome to The Whole View. I'm Stacy Top of Real Everything. I'm here each week to dive deeper into how we can find happiness and health inside and out through self-love, body positivity, and discovering new ways to be our best selves. Before we get started, a reminder, this podcast is for general educational purposes and is not intended to diagnose, advise, or treat any physical or mental illness. And we always recommend that you see a licensed health professional accordingly. I feel like today's guest needs no introduction, but in case you're not familiar with Rachel Cargle's work, I want to get you started today. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel. You are a public academic, a writer, a lecturer, not to mention entrepreneur and philanthropist, born in Akron, Ohio. Rachel's work and upcoming book centers the reimagining of womanhood, solidarity, and self, and how we are in a relationship with ourselves and one another. In 2018, she founded the Loveland Foundation, a nonprofit which has provided therapy support to over 10,000 Black women, girls, and gender non-binary individuals. And she has also led an umbrella company of the Loveland Group, which houses a collection of social ventures, including The Great Unlearn, The Great Unlearn for Young Learners, and Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center. You might know Rachel's work from being a regular contributor to Cultured Magazine, Atmos Magazine, and The Cut, and has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Forbes, Harper's Bazaar, The New Yorker, and most recently Time Magazine, right, Rachel? I just saw that yesterday.
Yeah, just
Yes.
today.
So exciting.
Yeah.
So in addition to her TED Talk stage, her appearance on Red Table Talk, and her public lecture, Unpacking White Feminism, which has been featured on campuses around the country, including American University, Yale, and Harvard, which I myself was one of the many white feminists who virtually attended in June 2020, I'm sure, along with a monthly column on harpersbazaar.com. Her work has been featured on the Washington Post, Glamour Magazine, Pop Sugar, Afropunk, Essence, Huffington Post, and Refinery 29. Is there a single place you haven't been featured?
I'm giggling so much at you getting the long version of my bio. Thank you. Taking the time to read through that. Wow. Thank you for having me.
Listeners need to understand your vast amazingness. So I'm so excited that you're here today to talk about your new book, The Renaissance of Our Own. But before we jump into that, is there anything I didn't cover? Anything you want to share about yourself?
You covered more than I have ever covered. So I'm passionate you going through that bio. You reminded me of some things. You took me back down memory lane in some ways. Thank you for reading through that. I liked that walk through some of the things I've had the wonderful opportunity to do. Thank you.
Love it. So while I have not been able to finish Renaissance of Our Own, I do want to say I have guests on who have written books, and I don't spend an entire day staying up until 1 a.m. reading their books before they're on the show. What I have read so far has really resonated deeply with me, and you eloquently put into words what so many of us are feeling right now, coming into a renaissance, as you so aptly call it. And what I love is that you pair it with actionable steps to bring about meaningful change in all of our own lives. Can you share more about what brought you to encouraging readers to reclaim their lives with a new set of values? I really love that foundation that you start with for reframing, created for and by themselves in their everyday lives.
Yeah. I think that this book it's an opportunity for me to share my story and invite others to consider what their story looks like too. I keep saying this book doesn't have many answers, but you'll walk away with all the questions that we need to ask ourselves to be able to be more introspective, to be able to be more self-knowing. And when we have that introspection and when we have that self-knowing, we're able to move through the world with a lot more ease and conviction, knowing ourselves and knowing that we're doing the things that align with our values. This book came from me recognizing that, we're on this life escalator that kind of puts us on at birth and pulls us up through all of these stages, this one path of, you know, graduation, a job, marriage, a kid, working through the corporate ladder, retirement. and it pulls you, and it's hard. The higher you go, the harder it is to get off. And, I think with the renaissance of our own, I'm looking to invite people to join me in getting off of that life escalator and building out a staircase, something beautiful, something colorful, something that speaks to what we know about ourselves. Because oftentimes, we can be caught running a race to a finish line we don't even actually want, a prize we don't even actually want. And I really started to consider that over my life. What are these milestones I'm running towards? What are these things I feel like I'm on the fast track or racing towards that don't even really apply to what I want? What do I understand success to be? What do I understand family to be? And if success isn't a bigger house and another car in a fancier place, then I can get off of this path and actually walk with ease and with some leisure and with some self knowingness towards what I am interested in. And I hope that's what the book invites people to do.
It definitely invited me to do it. I found that I like immediately went into the writing prompts and the different kind of things. So I want to say also it's not just your story because it is a memoir. It's also really inviting readers to take those moments, that time that you're talking about with the book to also determine why they want to get off the escalator. I think that's the thing that was different for me when I was reading it was like, yeah, I say all the time, I left corporate America. I did these things. I'm realigning to the things that matter to me. And instead, this really invited me to think through what do I really value and do the things that I'm stepping off the escalator for, so to speak, align to those values. And it also allowed me to, like, one of my values ended up being meaningful work. And it gave me space to say, I do enjoy working. Like, this is a thing that I enjoy doing. The thing that I want to do before is meaningful work. And then I can look at everything that I'm doing and say, does that align to the work being meaningful in some way for myself, for others, for community, whatever it might be?
I really love that insight from you because that's exactly the space that I hope people come to. And it's really beautiful and soft when we get to that space. I love this reality of you're saying, I actually want to do work. I want to be busy. I want to be busy doing meaningful things. And that's very different than what a lot of perhaps girl boss culture or all of these other spaces or even the conversation right now about rest and soft life, insisting that it not be something that we might have interest in. And being able to say, you know what? Work is something meaningful to me. It's something that I like to do, how I like to use my body and my energy or my thoughts. And, I talk a lot in the book about being able to take the meat and throw out the bones with anything that we read, with any of the approaches we take to growing ourselves or healing ourselves. And I think this book is a really wonderful opportunity for people to come to the pages with some agency and say, let me see what Rachel has to say that applies to me, and let me throw out the bones of what doesn't and really pick what's in alignment with my part of the journey. And I'm excited to engage with my readers about that point.
I love it. And I think what was another kind of special moment as a reader was the idea that you were really upfront in the book about the book being different than you had imagined, that you kind of had this reframe work as you were writing, needing to reimagine the very book that you were writing while you were writing it. Can you talk more about that process and if, in and of itself, it informed writing, that realization?
Well, that realization informs my work. Like, I really feel like my work is to think out loud, feel out loud, heal out loud, to look into these industries, these spaces, these understandings of ourselves and say, be curious, say, what could be different? How could this look new? How could this look more true to what we know, is needed right now? And as I was writing the book, this book really started as an anti-racism book, which is what my work has mostly centered around, doing anti-racism work. When I signed the contract, it was an anti-racism work. And writing that book would have been untrue if I if I didn't take into consideration the ways I was actively shape shifting and growing and moving in the process of writing it. And one of the things that came that like I downloaded as a understanding of myself was that doing such intensive, heavy anti-racism work was weathering me. It was weathering my body. It was weathering my mind. And it was necessary for me to reimagine how I could do the work that I'm doing, the work that I love, the work that's important to me in a new container, in a new shape that would serve not only the people that I most am committed to serving, which as you read the book, you will see that it is certainly Black women. I am a Black woman. And my friend often reminds me, like, Rachel, you too are a Black woman. You too are someone you're fighting for. And I had to be honest about that. I had to be true to the way that, you know, I too deserve the rest and the ease and the wellness that I'm insisting that I'm fighting for other people. And it was an opportunity for me to have a renaissance of my own, for me to decide that the way I show up in this work will not be centered in these things that often weather me, that exhaust me, but the same exact work, the same exact materials of the work, of the revolution, of the liberation, of the learning can exist in different ways. And so going through the book, writing through my own lessons, my own falls, my own, ways I've had to flip and turn in order to live in the world, show up not just in the stories, but on the pages as I was writing it. I am new, I am new, I am new every time. And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to infuse that real time renaissance onto the pages.
I wonder how, so you said that your contract was signed to be an anti-racist book. I'm wondering, assuming a timeline, so to speak, how the Great Awakening, I think it's being called, the work that happened in 2020, how did that affect your general work? And I mean, it sounds like it led to a book contract, which we all benefit from, which is great. But I know was part of this incredibly difficult, like painful process that you and everybody had to go through as white women came flooding for education as you're grieving and doing all these things. Like, I'm wondering how it impacted you and your work.
I actually signed this contract in 2018.
That's
So I
amazing.
got this contract before all of that happened. And exactly what I was speaking to, that in writing the book, in writing an anti-racism book, that I began to write before we had that, huge ebb in that huge crescendo in anti-racism education and in the interest in anti-racism, in the white women looking to learn. I was working, I was actively doing the work I was doing anyways. I was educating, I was teaching, I was offering language, I was engaging conversation while writing my book about the same exact things. And I burned out. I burned out in 2020 doing that work. And I told them if if I was to finish a book, it could not be centered in this thing that was tearing me apart at the moment. It could not be centered in this thing that was giving me the most grief at that moment. And so signing that book contract going into 2020 and having to set it down for a second to do the very urgent work that was happening in 2020 led me to, in that moment, say, I have to be well. I have to be new because this is burning me out. And it was in 2020 that I actually decided it wasn't going to be an anti-racism book because I wasn't going to be completely depleting myself. And I also wasn't, my writing and my craft has more use than fighting against racism. And so I wanted to be able to have a piece of work that wasn't just rooted in that thing that had been completely dissolving me over the last several years.
I think that's a really eloquent way to describe your work as being more than that. And I think your memoir does an excellent job in being more than that and also in leading by example to this life of ease that you talk about. Ease is one of your values, and you've mentioned it. I think it starts in your introduction of your memoir when you talk about your own awakening of the realization that feminism, which was your passion at that time, was rooted in many values and ideologies that, upon reflection, you didn't want to participate with or in or align with. Can you share more?
Yeah, so my own awakening about this intersection of race and womanhood came in I was really called out. I was called out by the Black community, and they were asking me, insisting that I have some curiosity around the truth of the feminist movement, around their own very real, visceral feelings that the feminist movement what did not have space for Black women. And as someone who was fairly new to feminism and very excited about feminism, I was taken aback that this thing that I was so excited about and so invested in might have some, like, murkiness to it that just, floored me. And I took that calling out as an opportunity for me to learn. And that's really where my career in this space started, was just me learning out loud, me trying to look for truths and understanding outside of every whitewashed history of feminism I'd ever seen or heard. All came from the perspectives of white people, the perspectives of white experiences, which is such a narrow slice of the truth. And having the opportunity to be jolted and, shaken into a space of learning, shaken into a space of reimagining everything I understood about not only racism, not only feminism, but then having this woven in understanding of what it means to be a Black woman in particular, really, opened the floodgates for me to be even more curious about what the truth was, and to find even more opportunities to learn out loud along with those who were reading my work or learning from me. And the things I was finding, the ways that the quote unquote founding mothers of feminism were saying racist things, like if you give women the right to vote, we that will support white supremacy, not diminish it, recognizing that they knew the power of white supremacy. And they knew that if they teased to that with their husband, if they teased to that with the men, that would be an in for them. This choosing whiteness over womanhood within the feminism they claimed was geared towards liberation of all women, and it just simply wasn't. And so when I started to learn that, and when I started to understand that, it really made me get critical about what my feminism looked like, what the feminism of those around me looked like. And it's really just been a powerful, moving journey of uncovering the truth, having this like radical anger towards injustice that I've seen within the movement. And it's been such a like gnarly place to exist in, and such a place of conflict and hard conversations, really. Hard conversations, yeah.
Well, I will say you have those hard conversations with such grace. I think ease is a word that you've chosen for yourself. I myself see you and your work as being very compassionate and filled with grace when you're approaching some of these things. It is not an easy thing for either of us. I have a minor in women's studies. I am 100% responsible and guilty for being that white feminist before the Great Awakening or whatever we're going to call what happened in 2020. And of course, I myself thought, like, well, I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for everybody, but not owning and being accountable for the true depth of what was rooted in our history and what just continuing along that path instead of questioning the path or being curious path, as you call it, needed to kind of take a step off of that path and say, I still want to go in that direction, but I'm not participating on this path anymore. We're going to forge a new path together. And if it weren't for the very difficult and graceful work of yourself and others like you, it couldn't have happened, and it was unreasonable to ask that of you in that moment as you were experiencing it, and so it's that grace is why I think where we are as a society we are today. I have a trans non-binary child. I have an LGBTQ child, like another child as well, and my understanding of participating in fighting for their rights. I didn't get married until the federal law was changed for everybody because I was like, "If everybody can't get married, then I don't want to get married." Like I fought for a very long time that I was participating in that positive direction, but it really took a lot to get me off a path that I thought I understood. And if I couldn't have heard it if it hadn't been for the gracefulness and the challenges also of people in the community. Like you were challenged in your memoir. I was also challenged, right? Like I was challenged with my weight fragility. I was challenged in all those ways. And it woke me up in a very good way. And so I know that was not the appropriate thing to ask of you. And I also just want to thank on behalf of the society who is along that path with me, thank you for the energy that you took into it and into your work, not just in the book, but also, the work that you do online and in social to educate, because it's my responsibility at this point to bring that forward. And I was reading your book with my husband in bed last night, and I got to the feminism chapter. And knowing what I know, like I still know those things. I was like, I went like 5 or 6 pages past the quotes about white supremacy being rooted in feminism and some of I love I think you called it the 18th century tweet. Like it was the equivalent of 18th century tweets or whatever it was that you said. And I had read it and I moved past and I came back and I was like, "Matt, I have to read this out loud to you because it's still like bothering me." I mean, it's still bothering me to know that, as you said, there were people who openly said, "I'm going to lean into the idea that this is going to support white supremacy with my spouse, my partner, to get my own rights and votes." Even though Black men had the right to vote, women were fighting for the right to vote and not bringing along Black women, and not just not bringing them along, but really, like, throwing them under the bus. It's hard to kind of sit with, and that hard work couldn't have happened without your grace, your education, and all the things that you did to kind of bring us along. So I wanna thank you for that, knowing full well that it wasn't okay for us to ask that of you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to talk about this values situation in your book. I told you I did my writing prompts. I came up with my values, and I'm wondering if you can share before we kind of ask listeners to do some participation in, because I always like to leave listeners with something positive and actionable. If you can explain a little bit about it and maybe share your own and how you came to determine them.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite parts of my work. It's one of my favorite parts of the book, this conversation on highest values, which the way that I've really been framing it, the language I've been using is that our highest values are, they're kind of conduits to our chosen selves. I I'm not a huge fan anymore of the term best self because best still denotes something could be bad. And I'm much more seduced by the language of our chosen selves, that thing we choose to be. And maybe it's my own childhood trauma around autonomy, my own Sagittarius spirit, my own, all of these things, my own avoidant attachment style, all of these things that might speak to why I find so much value in the language of chosen self. But I'm very seduced by sovereignty. I'm very seduced by this groundedness and knowingness because I really do feel like self knowing is one of the kindest things you can do in relationship with others, with yourself, with justice, with the work we're working towards revolution in community. Knowing yourself is really a gift. That certainty and that assuredness I find to be kind. And so, with these values being conduits to us getting to our chosen selves, finding our highest values helps to form that. And one of one of the things that I find really special about taking the time to figure out our highest values is that it's really all rooted in memory and dreaming. It's all rooted in remembering the things that moved us as children. Remembering the things that gave us joy. pondering on the things that constantly are on our mind, even maybe remembering some of our childhood traumas and figuring out how we can tend to that wound over the course of our lifetime. So it's the remembering of who we are. And then also the dreaming and saying, what type of life would I like to live? How do I want to feel in the day to day? What landscape do I want to live on, both metaphorically and physically? And marrying those two materials to say, oh, here's what it boils down to. Here are the three things, the four things, the one thing, depending on, what you find. What are the common denominators that show up in everything we love about our memory, everything we love and know about our memory, everything we are dreaming and hoping for? How do those two materials come together? And my highest values end up being ease, abundance, and opportunity. When I speak of ease, I don't mean easy. I don't mean the simplest thing. I mean the thing that feels softest to my soul, the thing that feels softest to my body, the thing that feels kindest to myself, that ease. Abundance is, stepping out of any ideas of scarcity. Abundance means finding ways to pour into community, having my cup run over for the sake of service and opportunity. Even though opportunity is shifting a little bit for me, I've had a lot of opportunity. And so I'm ready to pour into a few other things. And right now, for me, it's looking like a lot of nourishment. But in the book, I talk about opportunity and how much that meant for me to have opportunities myself and offer it to others. And the really powerful thing about going through the process of finding your highest values is that it gives you clear answers. It solidifies my yeses and it solidifies my nos. It makes my nos easier and it solidifies my yeses in a way that, if the spaces where I maybe used to grapple or feel stressed or frustrated be out of indecision, it's much easier with my highest values because I can say, does this bring me ease, abundance, or opportunity? These three things that I know are at the core of every way I want to exist in the world. If the answer is no, then the answer is no, and I don't have to feel guilty about it. I don't have to wonder if I made the right decision. I don't have to compare and contrast. And it really helps with that comparing and contrasting. And it's especially, having this book come out, it is impossible for me not to compare myself to everyone else who has a book coming out soon. So I'm looking and I'm like, well, what media did they get? And what creative ideas did they have? And one of the biggest tools to combat that feeling is, oh, that thing that they're doing, I actually wouldn't even want to do it because it's really not fitting into any of my values. So instead of feeling a way about why I didn't do it or how I could have done it, I can just be happy for them that they are in their lane and they are using their values to do the thing that they want to do. And so highest values are, like I said, that conduit to our chosen self, but it's also just a really good tool to pick up when we're feeling those hard feelings.
I appreciate so much of what you just said and found in the moment where you mentioned using it as a potential to heal your childhood self as a click for me on my third value, which I was really struggling with. Like I told you, meaningful work matters for me. And I bundle a lot of things in there. Like I'm an Enneagram 8, justice is huge for
Mhm.
me. And so I didn't use justice as a value because I find that that's the work that I do. Like for me, I think of fighting for justice, fighting for my foster kiddos' rights, for fighting for other people as part of my meaningful work. Someone else might not describe that as work, but for me, my values, I do. And I also just realized that I had chosen knowledge as my third, but because I love to educate on the work that I'm doing and to bring people along. But I realized now, like, no, that's part of the meaningful work for me. Really, the other one that I wanted to add was compassion, and I just kept, like, coming back and being like, "Well, there isn't space for compassion," and as you were talking, it made me realize, no, compassion is the thing I need to make space for. Like, that's the thing that I'm not making space for that I really need to have the perspective that you had about aligning to where I wanna go and also having compassion for that childhood person of mine that wanted and needed some of compassion that I didn't feel like I got when I needed it. And so now that is really something that is a core value that I want. to bring more of into my life. So I appreciate your explanation, the way that you gave it and how you've incorporated it into your life and how we can continue to do that ourselves. Because even as you did, after having read the book, I was still like, oh, I don't know about this. And it's also just last night. But working through that, I think, is really important and something that I encourage our listeners to think about and bring in. And your book, A Renaissance of Their Own, will kind of explain and pull them into that self reflection so that they can think about their own lives, past and future, from that perspective. I'm wondering if you have other actionable ways to bring readers along on this journey with you and specific to your book, your work, and all the different things that you have going on. We talked at the beginning about the Loveland Foundation and your phil- philanthropic work. I always have such a hard time with that word. I'd love to hear more on all of this as well.
Yeah, so the Loveland Foundation, it came out in 2018. It was something that was formed after I had an experience in therapy as an adult for the first time, really having a bit of a breakthrough moment. And I was really moved to figure out ways to get as many Black women into therapy as I could possibly do. And I started to, at the time in 2018, I probably had 10,000 followers or so, and I was able to raise $10,000 in the first 24 hours, and it really clicked in the community of what this work could be and how we could do it as a community. And it's grown so much over the years, and we've been able to do a lot of really powerful work, to offer tens of thousands of hours of therapy to tens of thousands of Black women and girls across the country, and to put this money into the pockets of tens of thousands of Black therapists who often, probably not tens of thousands of Black therapists, but thousands of Black therapists who have the opportunity to do this really meaningful work in the world. And I'm really grateful for the way that the foundation has kind of sprawled out into this landscape of its own, of reducing the stigma around mental health, of supporting Black women and girls to get access to healing, because we know when women heal, it ripples out into the homes, into the communities and the neighborhoods and the organizations. And it's really powerful work that the team there is doing. And I feel very grateful to have seated and get to continue to support what's happening at the foundation.
Are you familiar with Rachel Rogers' work?
Yes, Rachel's a very good friend of mine.
That
Yes.
she, in her book, which I read last month as part of like a book club that I'm in, like a business book club, she talks about the power that women have. m- I think I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it was a very high percentage that women give back to the community when they are successful versus when men do. And I know we're using a lot of like man and woman in the show, and we're just a kind of disclaimer for listeners. Obviously, we're not assuming that all are either men or women from binary. And when we look at statistics and things like that, use those kinds of binaries. So it was a powerful awakening for me in that moment because I myself am a leader of a large group of women, and to think of like other women that I know and how they choose to give back to community when they have access to do so, whether it's with money or time or whatever, versus like when our male partners have time and how they choose to spend that time. So I love that the Loveland Foundation, as you said, is not only giving to help heal and bring those needing it forward, but also lifting up a community of therapists who otherwise wouldn't maybe have work, and how both of those people can then go pay it forward. Like the impact and the ripple that it has is such a good model for how we can all find ways to incorporate those kinds of passions in our lives. And I know that's not your only charity though. Can you talk a little bit about the other Loveland kind of groups that you have? They might not be nonprofit, but you also hold space for other things in your life. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the Loveland Group is the family of social companies that I have, and the Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center, it's a bookstore in my hometown of Akron, Ohio, up in Northeast Ohio, and I started that bookstore in 2020, and what makes our bookstore different than any others is we have no white cis men on our shelves. We feel like we've heard enough from them, and we're excited to center and celebrate more marginalized voices, people of color, people with disability, indigenous people, people who are immigrants, people for whom English is not their first language, being able to celebrate and learn from voices that have such a wealth of knowledge and information for us to weave into our understanding of the world, to give us a clearer picture, to give us a deeper connection to the earth, to each other. And it's been a really wonderful space. And it's called Elizabeth. Elizabeth is my middle name. I used to beg my mom to call me Elizabeth when I was a child. And so this bookstore is really a gift to my younger self to represent that relationship that I continue to have with my younger self and offering that, avid reader a space that I didn't have when I was a child. And I also have The Great Unlearn. And The Great Unlearn is just a really special space of people who are curious, people who are interested in learning from voices that are not usually centered. We are a self-paced and donation-based learning platform online, and we offer a monthly syllabus that covers really fascinating topics that let us understand the world and ourselves better. We have talked about everything from the history of Black cowboys in Western America to indigenous fire knowledge and how it affects the California fires and the necessity to honor indigenous knowledge. We really just dive into topics that move us with a lens that really informs the whole of the situation, the truth of the situation from those who are most involved and most affected. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity to engage in just critical I miss being in school. I miss being in the classroom. I miss debating and hearing others' opinions. And so the Great Unlearn is a space that I created for those who are autodidactic, for those who are curious, for those who still want to learn and grow and understand. And it's donation based. So whatever you can give to be a part of the community is really special to us. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity to build out a family of companies that are invested in our collective learning and healing and curiosity.
And you also have one for young people as well, which I think is fantastic. I myself have 4 young people,
Yeah.
one of whom has only been in my house for 2 years, and I think it's interesting to help them kind of learn and come along and sharing history through a different sort of lens than it was taught to us. And so I love that you're providing a space for young people to learn and to have access to that as well. So before we go, I always like to leave listeners with some positive, actionable suggestions that they can take to be of service to work on themselves or their community. I'd love to hear your ideas. I think we talked about some of them that you present in Renaissance of Their Own. But do you have any others you want to share before we part ways?
Yeah, one of the exercises in the book and that you can do in many spaces is really just to meditate on your future self, to be in relationship with your future self, to get to know them, to ask them questions, to sit quietly with them and see what answers they might offer. I think it is such a powerful tool to be in relationship with a version of yourself that might be able to give you direction, giving you a calibration that isn't outside of you, that isn't rooted in something outside of you. And so building that relationship with your future self, meditating on that is definitely absolutely worthy of time.
I love it. I appreciate your time and your perspective with today's show. And we'll put a link in the show notes, listeners, for you to find a Renaissance of Their Own. I want to encourage you to check your local booksellers. And Rachel is not only doing a virtual book event, but also physically coming. I myself have tickets to your Washington, D.C. book signing,
Oh,
so I want to encourage listeners to find your book locally if possible, but I'm assuming it's in all bookstores, available everywhere.
yeah, it's at all bookstores. It's a renaissance of our own. I think you said there a few times,
Oh,
just for
sorry. Thank you for
okay.
correcting me.
And yeah, all booksellers. You can, if you'd like to buy it online from my own bookstore, you can get the link from my page as well, and we can send it over to you.
Are those is there any special, like, signed or anything if somebody wants to gift send?
Yeah, the any books purchased from my bookstore is a signed copy.
Wonderful. Good to know, and we'll make sure that we put links in the show notes for people to find those easily, but you can also find them through rachelcargle.com, or I'm sure it's in the links in your bio on social media and all the places. So, listeners, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate your willingness to be open to growth and through your own personal changes. No one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can become better versions of ourselves, which now I'm going to rethink. I say that every week. And your perspective on better or best version of ourselves being kind of led in perfectionist tendencies is something I'm gonna take away from this conversation. So thank you for that, Rachel.
Thank you.